Outside these walls, the very slings and arrows of misfortune soar. Our minds are on much higher things. We leave these troubling trifles for those of you who'd cry and bawl and grieve. Of this we'd like to stay naive. So with your hats and coats, please leave conversation at the door. No news presents current events, just as they unfold. Do come in, but please shut up and don't discuss the outside world. The world may be our oyster, but please could it stay clamped shut? Let's not roister, let us cloister, spare ourselves from hell-damned smut. Entrance only goes to those with permits to this bastion of hermits. We shan't let the world get hermits on our quiet little rot. Some strange idea to fight in the Crimea was the latest news we'd heard. Do come in, but please shut up, don't discuss the outside world. Please come in, but do shut up, don't discuss the outside world. Your life in traction to such as that the world is prone, we'd prescribe instead inaction. Stay with us or stay at home. It's not enough to down your sabre. You must cease action and labour to improve life for your neighbour. You must leave him well alone. Let's call a truce on the abuse that is regularly held. Do come in, but please shut up, don't discuss the outside world. Please come in, but do shut up and don't discuss the outside world.
Hello and welcome to this, the fourth episode of the For All That podcast with me, Andrew Tickell, with my co-host Michael Greenwell, and joining us today is Gary Dunion, an editor of the Bright Green Scotland blog. Gary will be hosting a session at the Radical Independence Conference next Saturday at the Radisson in Glasgow. Gary, thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. So if we can just crash right on with the kind of stories of the week. Gary, you were spotting something that was going on in Westminster, I think, involving Vodafone, tax evasion, and a committee of the House of Commons. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Indeed, this was a hearing of the Public Accounts Committee of the House of Commons, which ordered into its august company representatives of Starbucks, Vodafone and Google to explain their tax arrangements, all of which are fairly creative. And
creative here meaning a very canny, lawyerly way of avoiding tax.
Exactly. And I think it was as someone who's worked on in the past, I've worked on campaigns on commodities trading. The Starbucks evidence was the most interesting. Starbucks is a company which, according to its accounts and its relationship with the Inland Revenue, doesn't make any profit in the UK. And your layperson might reasonably ask, why bother having all the shops? It doesn't make any profit. Of course, the consequence of not making any profit, it doesn't pay any corporation tax. And this was what the Public Accounts Committee were keen to get to the bottom of. And it has to be said that Starbucks representative put together a thoroughly Murdoch-level account of themselves in the company of this committee. It transpires that in the space they were available, at the time they had available to them, they really it couldn't be said to get to the bottom of it. But it transpires that essentially what Starbucks are doing, and it's quite a good primer for how these things operate in multinational companies in general, is creating internal markets whereby they're paying the parent company well over the odds for things, thus meaning that the shops themselves make no money. The parent company makes loads of money, but the parent company is making that money in the Netherlands, Switzerland, in this case, where the tax regime is presumably much more generous.
Did you feel that what often I find about with areas that I know about when I watch the House of Commons at work, and maybe we saw it a bit with the Murdoch actually, and we see it too in Hollywood as well, that the MPs are actually not very good at forensically questioning people. That the desire for the kind of limelight, for the quotation that gets in the paper, can often actually weigh against an actually effective scrutiny. I don't know if you thought that was what I didn't see the session myself actually, Gary, but I don't know what you think about how the MPs actually got on with it.
I think that's absolutely true. I think it probably did generate more heat than light. And having said that, there's some value to simply putting the issue on the agenda and raising awareness of it and creating a bit of drama such that people are aware of what's going on. But there's absolutely no doubt that if you do actually want to unravel these things and make sure you have the information that perhaps the Inland Revenue would be able to get more money out of them, or the information you need to actually close these loopholes and change legislation and whatever. These kinds of battles, these kind of jousts, don't seem to be the way to get that detailed information.
Leaving aside the Inland Revenue, who would always want the money, do you think that the political class actually do want to get into the bottom of it, or the corporate friends just keeping them out, keeping them okay?
Well, I have to say, Michael, there's really no evidence of any urgency. Really been no evidence of any urgency on this before it became the focus of protest. I think the focus on tax avoidance is a really good advert, an argument for the usefulness of protest, because this basically, as far as I can tell, this session is a direct result of the activities of UK Uncut, and perhaps to a lesser extent because they had different focuses, Occupy. And when UK Uncut made the decision to focus on tax avoidance and tax evasion, that just wasn't an issue. That wasn't an issue in the public sphere. It was not something that politicians spent any time talking about. It wasn't something that Newsnight spent any time talking about. And by a programme of, has to be said, pretty vanilla, pretty tame civil disobedience, UK Uncut were able to make this a national issue. And that's not to say the establishment as a whole is, necessarily going to act on it, but at least it's now got us to the point where people like Margaret Hodge, the chair of the Public Accounts Committee, feel like it's worthwhile. If she's going to grandstand on something, she may as well grandstand on this, and push out the public agenda. So it's maybe not got to the stage where it's an absolute political imperative that you have to close these loopholes, but it's certainly got from being no one talking about this to this being a serious subject to political debate.
But at the same time, I still don't see it as, they're grandstanding, some of them, but they're still much more likely to be grandstanding about the usual benefit cheats, single mothers, asylum seekers, the usual kind of, they pick on the easy targets. And for them, this is obviously, in some cases, actually their funders. So it's not only that it's not only an easy target, it's their friends as well.
Well, I think that's true, and that's to say, this is not a problem that is solved. But I think we can take some comfort from the fact that it's being discussed at all.
I agree.
As we said, that Starbucks, Vodafone, and Google, Vodafone in particular, actually got a pretty rough ride from these people. That's not to say that, like I say, it may very well be that their bark is worse than their bite. But it was a pretty brutal grilling for these guys, and it certainly will not have looked good. And Starbucks have also, I'm dare say it happened to us in the future. Vodafone have been the subject of a great deal of kind of store invasions and pickets and so on from the likes of UK Cut in the past. Starbucks are going to be the subject of a nationwide day of store invasions and demonstrations on Saturday the 8th of December.
No, I agree. I think it's marvellous, like what they've achieved so far.
These things, I've absolutely no idea what the calculation is. I dare say not paying any tax, pays for an awful lot of discomfort and difficulty on the high street. But these things, of course, are extremely expensive. If you're Vodafone, you get your Oxford Street flagship store shut down for a full Saturday 2 weeks before Christmas. This happened last year. that's going to cost you an awful lot of money, and it's going to make you think, and then add to that all the reputational damage and so on. It's going to make you think twice about some of these things in the future. And we do know that some of these things have changed corporate, but whether or not they've changed national policy is perhaps something more difficult to claim. But certainly these things have changed corporate policy in the past. McDonald's went through absolute self-inflicted tortures in the aftermath of McLibel because the reputational damage was so huge that they had to, change the whole menu and stop importing beef into Britain and change all their staffing practices and stuff. It's still a pretty unpleasant organisation, but it's a relatively small intervention by a relatively small number of protesters led to the expenditure of tens of millions of dollars in this company in trying to repair the reputational damage and be just a little bit more palatable to the public.
No, it's fabulous. Just to put in a funny one, creative civil disobedience, I think you call it. Do you remember Mark Thomas, the comedian? You know Mark Thomas, not remember. Mm-hmm. I heard a brilliant one about him from the Disney store, and this guy was it was in one of his shows, and he said that this guy goes to the Disney store to do pigeon herding. He said, what's pigeon herding? He says, well, you put all that's whatever they throw the stuff. And all the pigeons outside the door, so all the pigeons are around the door of the Disney store, which is always open. And then you take a big run up, and all the pigeons fly into the shop.
It's a hobby.
Yeah, no, that's quite.
I think that's.
I think UK's proposal for this week on Saturday is that we ought to appropriate Starbucks stores and use them to replace the women's services that are being cut as a result of their non-payment of tax. So, creches and refuges and
brilliant.
women's health clinics and that kind of thing. We'll manufacture these inside Starbucks shops up and down the country.
I think that's. I was just particularly interested in what you said there, Gary, about the impact, a positive impact that protest can have. Because I must say for myself, I'm not one of life's big protesters, and that's maybe because I'm kind of anti-social bism. But I exactly, instead of but I think it raises a really interesting question about what in the kind of more academic literature is kind of soft power, those kind of things, about and how that's exercised through society and through things like reputation, through communications, and instead of this idea that actually the way to impact on various different things is to gain the levers of power, and anything else of that is waste of time. And I mean the kind of formal levers of power through getting people elected and so on. It does sort of suggest the kind of opportunities which are out there for putting pressure on folk in interesting ways and having achievements which are not immediately apparent from the whole process. Just to give another example in the kind of Scottish context, you could argue that a critical force for stealing the SNP's position on tuition fees before the last Holyrood election was the mass flare-up of protest in England. Now, that's not to say that was successful in its own terms in England, but the whole process certainly, I'm sure, must have given Alex Salmond and Mike Russell a certain chill up the spine if they were ever even considering, and I'm not saying that they were, but if they were ever even considering on backtracking. So it does sort of, I think, suggest this rather more decentered sort of idea about where power actually operates and can operate in our society.
I think that's absolutely right, and I totally agree with you on student protests. I mean, it's a matter of bewilderment to a lot of people why it is that the effective dismantling of the NHS south of the border went through with kind of barely a murmur in the media, and that's actually in sharp contrast to the student demonstrations, which dominated the news for weeks on end. And basically the reason was that there was a limited amount of property damage at Millbank, and it probably wasn't even that much, probably a few thousand pounds, but it was that level of protest was enough to make it an issue. Whereas with the health thing, it wasn't an issue, despite the fact, or wasn't a major immediate issue, despite the fact that the reality of the policy was much more radical and affected many more people. It was the existence of protest that changed the public discussion about that.
And is there, there's just a last wee point on this before we maybe move on to our next wee topic. But one thing that strikes me, and I was talking to a Swedish pal here the other day about the Olympics opening ceremony. I'm sure you probably both saw it or at least heard about it. And there was that segment in it about the NHS. And my Swedish pal was saying, well, what do you really think about that? Why was that there? What does it denote? And I was sort of explaining to him the reality about how the NHS is actually structured in administrative terms in the UK. So when you hear Ed Miliband talking about the NHS, when you hear Better Together saying we should oppose independence because of the NHS, that's simply not true anymore. And I wonder, in contrast to the student